Welcome back to We Want Picks. I'm Artem MMA, and I'm going to be breaking down the PFL 2024 Championships, which is the final event of the PFL 2024 season, and they're going to be doing a massive event here. It is going to be 16 MMA fights, and a lot of them are 5 rounds, because not only are the championships where the fighters are going to be fighting for the $1 million in the finals here on the main card, there also are fighters in the PFL MENA finals, which is the PFL's Middle East finals, are going to also all be 5-round fights. So there really could just be a very long day of MMA ahead, and that doesn't even include the prelims, which are pretty stacked as well. I think there are going to be some fun fights on those prelim cards. It is going to be taking place on Friday. The start time is 9:30 AM Eastern time. Knowing PFL's pacing though, this event is probably just going to go all day. And honestly, it should just be a pretty good day of MMA. There is no UFC on this weekend, so I think a lot of people will probably be tuning into the PFL, and especially since it is the PFL finals, there is a lot at stake here. There is the $1 million grand prize per weight division at stake on that main card. It should be a pretty fun one, and of course I have been covering PFL throughout the year on the We Want Picks channel, but also on the We Want Picks website. If you do sign up using my code ARTEM, you can get 10% off any membership, but that is only a one-time use there. We did make a little small change because people were unfortunately exploiting the trial to do things in the public Discord, so we had to make a quick change there. But of course, Angelo has probably told you all about what is on that website, but what is also on that website is articles that I write every single week. Last week I wrote an article on Cage Warriors, LFA, Ares FC, and Brave. So that was 4 regional events that I did cover last week, and of course I will be covering the PFL and other events that are on this weekend too. But with that being said, I'll see you guys now in the predictions. So the first prelim of the night is going to be a women's atomweight amateur bout between Hatan Al-Saif and Lilia Osmani. Since it is an amateur fight, there won't be any odds for this one, but I do think that Al-Saif will probably win this. They are really trying to push Hatan Al-Saif as the next female fighter out of Saudi Arabia, and so far she has been having a couple of good performances. But the first pro fight of the night is going to be between Costello van Steenis fighting against Joao Vitor Dantas, and Joao Vitor Dantas has not fought for 2 years now, and before that he has been fighting for Jungle Fight and one stint in the LFA, which didn't last too long. Joao Vitor Dantas is mostly a pressure forward striker. This guy has his hands very low, and in fact they are about by his waist, and he holds them in a very weird way where he just has his elbows kind of at 90 degrees with his hands just kind of in front of him, and he just comes forward and he throws bombs. He does have some grappling to him, but for the most part this guy is just trying to knock you out, and in fact all of his wins so far in his career have come by knockout, and a lot of them in the first 2 rounds. Most recently, I think he had a somewhat unimpressive performance against Carlos Alberto Bazan Rojas, where Bazan Rojas actually dropped him in that fight pretty early on into the matchup, but Dantas was able to scramble a little bit, took his back, and then was able to recover and end up getting the KO later on in the fight in the 2nd round. But in that one, Dantas kind of looked like he was gassing out a little bit, and he started slowing down in the 2nd round, and I don't really like seeing that all that much. And a similar story can kind of be said about his other matchups, which you can find on the Jungle Fight YouTube channel. Costello van Steenis, I will admit, is a fighter which I have had some pretty bad reads on in the past. I do remember a while ago, I actually did pick Kamil Onachuk to defeat him, and of course that didn't happen. And then after that, he did fight against Douglas Lima. He lost to Douglas Lima in a fight which I predicted him to win. And then finally, I got a correct pick on him when I did pick him to defeat Gregory Babini. But Gregory Babini is like 42 years old or something like that. I think Costello van Steenis in this matchup should just be a little bit better almost everywhere. I think he should just avoid the striking of Joao Vitor Dantas. Van Steenis is a grappler. He likes to get the fight down to the ground, and when he does have very good top control, and he does have very good submission ability. At middleweight, you don't really see guys getting submissions like he does, and he's got 8 submission wins on his record. I think in this one here, if he can just avoid the big power from Vitor Dantas, he should be able to get the fight down to the ground, and he should be able to find a submission as well. He's minus 400, which is pretty wide, but Joao hasn't fought for 2 years now, and even then I wasn't that impressed by what I saw before then. So I do like Van Steenis here, and I am going to pick Van Steenis to win by submission in the 2nd or the 3rd round. Now we move up to Asael Adjouj fighting against Jose Perez. a little bit of a striker versus grappler matchup, and I feel like Asael Adjouj has now had a couple of those now throughout his career. Asael Adjouj is a fighter with a big-time kickboxing background. This guy was a world champion and a national champion in kickboxing before transferring over to MMA, and so far he has been able to find quite a lot of success by doing so. He is quite tall at 145, he stands at 6 foot tall, and he does fight from range pretty well, despite being somewhat low volume at times. He does have pretty good KOs, he does have a head kick KO as well in Bellator before he came over to the PFL, which was quite impressive when he did that over Jordan Barton there in 2022, and since then, he has been on a pretty good win streak over quite a few good prospects, and that win over Liam McCracken is a very good win over a very promising prospect from England. Jose Perez made his debut relatively recently against Jesse Stern. He took on a veteran grappler in his own right and was able to beat that veteran grappler, but before that was fighting for Cage Fury FC and has been finding a lot of success by doing so. He is a grappler, he does like to control with that top control and then work for submissions like that, but I do think on the feet he is going to be at a bit of a disadvantage here against Adjouj. And one thing that Adjouj does do quite well is he does like to keep fighters away from him at bay so they can't go out there and just shoot the takedowns on him, and I do think that Adjouj should be able to do that against Perez. But I do think that Perez is going to have a very significant grappling advantage here. So it could be a good test for Asael Adjouj, but so far I have been impressed by what I have seen. And Asael Adjouj is a slight favourite here at -180. And I do think that he is going to be able to defeat Perez. Probably not by KO. Perez is a tough guy. He has been KO'd before, but that was in like 11 seconds. It was just like a flash knockout at the start of a fight. I don't know if Adjouj is going to be able to work his way towards a finish, but I do think that Adjouj is going to win by decision. And now we have an interesting fight. Jesus Pinedo is going to be fighting against Jeremy Kennedy. Jesus Pinedo actually did win the $1 million all that time ago, 11 months ago. Not that long ago, but he did win the $1 million last year, and before that he actually defeated Brendan Loughnane to make it happen. Now he fights against Jeremy Kennedy. Kennedy is a veteran. This is a guy that has been around Bellator for a very long time and now is going to be transferring over to the PFL because the PFL has taken over Bellator. But Jeremy Kennedy has that massive win over Aaron Pico there. But it is very unfortunately that the win unfortunately did have to come due to a shoulder injury. Since then he did fight against Carvalho, defeated Carvalho, who is just a chinny boxer, to be honest at this point, and then he did lose to Pitbull in a pretty fun matchup in his own right. I do think though in this one that we are going to see Jesus Pinedo be able to just beat Jeremy Kennedy by keeping the fight on the feet, and as long as the fight is on the feet, I do think that Pinedo is going to have a striking advantage here. This is a former PFL champion. This is a guy who did win the $1 million in the 2023 tournament, and then he just didn't return for the 2024 tournament. Maybe he was injured, I am not too sure, but he did defeat Gabriel Braga to make that happen, and I did actually think that he won the original matchup against Gabriel Braga as well. He's a very talented striker, he does use his size well, and he does have some pretty good power too. I think he is going to be able to beat Jeremy Kennedy in this matchup. And now we can move up to another prelim at heavyweight. Slim Trabelsi is fighting against Abraham Babley. Slim Trabelsi, in my opinion, is just a very talented heavyweight prospect. This is a guy that has all of the skills to really make things happen, I think, at the heavyweight division. But unfortunately, throughout his career, he's had like quite a few controversies, as in like management problems. I know that when he was signed to the UFC, if you guys don't know, Trabelsi was signed to the UFC, as something just fell from my cupboard. He was signed to the UFC to fight against Parker Porter on short notice, and he did withdraw due to contract issues there, and there was a big controversy that did go down about that. And then he signed to Bellator, and it seemed like he hasn't been able to fight all that much because of contract issues again. So there's kind of a lot going on with Trabelsi behind the scenes, but once he does get in that cage, he really is a talented fighter. He is a wrestler for the most part, and when he does get the takedowns, he's very dominant on top. He has a couple big wins over John Winter, Luis Enrique Barboza, but also that massive win over Azamat Nuftalayev, who might find his own way into the UFC pretty soon, as he's won a few fights recently. Abraham Babley, I was quite surprised to find that he's also a wrestler as well. He did defeat Pinson, Isaiah Pinson, who was a guy that the PFL were building up for a little bit. And in that fight, he did get it done with the wrestling. Bubbly is a smaller heavyweight. He does stand at 5'10", but he doesn't really look that undersized necessarily, so it will be interesting to see how he looks in there against Slim Trabelsi. But I do think in this one, it's going to be a wrestling match, and I think the better wrestler out of the two is Slim Trabelsi. Undefeated versus undefeated is fun, but I think that Slim Trabelsi is just a true heavyweight talent, and this is a guy that you don't really see this level of talent at heavyweight that often, and he is a guy that I am quite high on, and I do think he's very good. Trabelsi's minus 192, and I do think he's going to be able to get it done here against Abraham Babley. It's just worth noting that this is a big step up in competition for Babley, whereas Trabelsi's already fought a pretty couple good guys. John Winter, undefeated at the time, Dulaev, undefeated at the time. Franklin's a good win. Louis Sutherland's a massive guy for heavyweight as well, and that's a pretty good win as well. Now, Mansour Barnaoui is going to be returning now against Alfie Davis. This was a massive signing for Bellator at the time because, of course, he did win that massive Road FC tournament. And if I'm not mistaken, I also think there was a $1 million tournament as well. I think it was a lot of fighters were involved in this Road FC tournament. I could be incorrect about the amount of money that he won, but he won a lot of money by winning this tournament here, defeating Asael Kwan in the finals. And then he signed to Bellator, won against Adam Piccolotti in a grappling fight where he submitted him pretty big. And then he lost a couple of fights, and we've kind of lost a little bit of hype on him now, which is a shame. But if you do look into it, the ways that he lost is pretty odd, because JJ Wilson actually outgrappled him in that loss. And that was a little bit of an odd loss to see from Barnaoui, who is just a really talented grappler. This guy's a lights-out wicked grappler at 155 pounds. But JJ Wilson outgrappled him, and that was weird. And Brent Primus outgrappled him, and that was also weird. He did get a big win recently, though, against Yusuke Yachi, but it was a step down in competition and a first-round submission. He's fighting now against a striker in Alfie Davis, and it is just going to be a grappler versus striker matchup. Davis is now on a pretty good win streak. Davis has also defeated a couple of decent wrestlers in his time. You know, Tibalt Guti can go for takedowns every now and then. Alon Cruz can go for takedowns every now and then. But I do think once the fight does get down to the ground, I think Barnaoui is going to have a very significant grappling advantage. And I do think that Barnaoui is going to get a submission win in this matchup against Alfie Davis. And now we can move on to the PFL MENA finals. So these are the finals of the PFL's Middle East promotion. And these are also all going to be 5 rounds. So we've got Abdalrahman Alhysat fighting against Abdullah Al-Qahtani. And what's interesting about this fight is this is a rematch from not even that long ago, where only 2 months ago we did see Abdalrahman Alhysat manage to pull off what, in my opinion, was a pretty big upset against Abdullah Al-Qahtani. And in that first fight, I picked Abdullah Al-Qahtani to win by knockout, and my goodness, was I proven wrong. Abdalrahman Alhysat looked better everywhere. Al-Qahtani was not reacting well to the shots that Alhysat was landing against him at all very well. And Alhysat was able to even get takedowns and get control in moments. I thought Alhysat won all 3 rounds, and what happened was Alhysat was actually meant to fight against somebody else in the finals, but their opponent, Islam Raider, did have to pull out. So now on short notice, we have Al-Qahtani trying to get his revenge back. But honestly, after watching the first fight, I just can't see Alhysat losing. I just cannot really believe the performance that he put on the first time. But if you really watch it, every time Alhysat was throwing, Al-Qahtani was just hiding, like he was just shelling up and hiding backwards, and he just didn't want to throw counters at all, and just so many bad body language movements that I was seeing from that matchup. He didn't deal well with the pressure that Alhysat was throwing at all either, and even then, as I said, Alhysat was able to win everywhere. He even got takedowns on Al-Qahtani, so my opinion on this fight has really shifted, because I think that now on short notice, Al-Qahtani coming in for a 5-round fight where Alhysat has been preparing. Alhysat already defeated Abdullah Al-Qahtani. I think that's going to be a big deal. And now being 5 rounds, of course, as I did just mention, Al-Qahtani is now going to have to try and last 5 rounds against Alhysat. And one thing about Alhysat, he is just so much faster than Al-Qahtani. He really does have a very significant speed advantage. He throws more volume. He throws more often. He pressures forward. I just like kind of almost everything about Alhysat in this fight. I think that he's a very impressive prospect out of Jordan to keep your eye out for. And I do think that he can defeat Abdullah Al-Qahtani here. what I was originally so high on about Abdullah Al-Qahtani when I was trying to pick him was I thought that him was able to get the pressure going, him was able to land the big shots. That wasn't the case in the first fight, and honestly, I think that we're just going to see a repeat of what happened the first time. So I am going to pick Abdalrahman Alhysat here. He is only minus 130. I believe he was a pretty big underdog the first time around, but I think that we are going to see Alhysat get the win again over that same opponent. Then we move up to the lightweight championship of the PFL MENA. Once again, 5-round fight between Mohsen Mohammadseifi versus Georges Aid. One thing about Mohsen Mohammadseifi is that this guy is so fun to watch. He is 5'5" at 155 pounds, so he's pretty short, but he's pretty well built. And my goodness, this guy is fun to watch because being a lot shorter than his opponents, he has to get in pretty close to land his shots. And what he does is he just rushes forward. He just rushes forward, throwing combinations, throwing boxing combinations, and throwing a lot of hooks. He's a lot of fun to watch. This guy is one of the more fun fighters to watch, I think, just on this card in general. And he does take on a guy which has a somewhat similar style to him. Georges Aid, though, I will say, at 5'9", is a pretty big guy for 155 pounds. He's not necessarily tall, but he does make up for it with a pretty decent amount of size. And he does have pretty good KO power. He actually got a couple of KOs in the... He only got one KO, sorry, in the PFL MENA tournament, but he did get a KO beforehand against Omar Ragwigwi. And Omar Ragwigwi is kind of an odd case because he was 4-0 against guys that weren't very high competition, but he was getting a lot of cancelled fights, and Aid took the fight and ended up knocking him out. But Mohsen Mohammadseifi has been able to find a pretty decent amount of success against some pretty good competition, I would say, so far. He defeated Josh Togo, who is a pretty tricky boxer who was representing Lebanon, but he does, I believe, live and train in Australia. Togo is a pretty fun fighter to watch, but Mohsen was able to close the distance and knock him out. And against Sahil Tahiri, that was a 3-round fight. It went all the way. And in that fight, we're able to see him mix up that close-range boxing that he does have as well, with a couple of takedowns just every now and then. In this matchup, I'm going to go with Mohammadseifi to win the fight. I do think that he can defeat Georges Aid here. He's just a lot of fun, man. Like, this isn't a fight that I would bet on at all because, as I said, Aid is a pretty big guy and he does like to move forward. But I think that we are going to see Mohammadseifi be able to go out there and win the matchup. One thing I am just a little bit worried about is the cardio, because he does come out with a pretty high amount of volume. But I think that he should be able to get it done. I'm not necessarily sure if he can get a KO, but 5 rounds is a lot of time to get a finish, isn't it? I'm going to pick him to win, though. I'm not too sure necessarily about what I'm going to do with that prop, though. And it doesn't look like there are any odds out for this fight, but I think that just looking at Tapology odds, maybe Mohammadseifi will be a slight favourite here. And then we move up to the bantamweight finals here. Ali Taleb fights against Rachid Haz, and I'm very confident in Ali Taleb here to get the knockout. Ali Taleb is a guy that has a lot of power on the feet. He is a bit of a brawler. He's a boxer for the most part, but he's not necessarily the most technical guy. But when he lands pretty hard. He can be out-wrestled, which is definitely something to bring up here because he is taking on a wrestler in Rachid Haz. But I think on the feet, the striking differential is going to be quite significant. One thing about Ali Taleb is this guy does love to come forward. This guy does love to throw down. He likes to land some big shots, and he does have a very, very big win on his record against Vinicius Oliveira, who is a guy that is now going on into the UFC and finding a lot of success. Vinicius Oliveira just beat up Ricky Simone for 3 rounds, you know, and also knocked out Bernardo Sapai in his debut. So I think that that's a good win. And in that fight, he does take a bit of damage, but Ali Taleb ended up knocking him out pretty clean with a counter left hook. And we've been able to see that happen so far in the PFL. He did it in PFL Europe, where he got wrestled by Kroket Kakarov, but then after that, he come to the PFL MENA, and he knocked out Jalal Al-Daeja in his most recent matchup. I think against Rachid Haz, he can knock him out. As I said, this is going to be a pretty big, significant striking differential between the two. Rachid Haz is a guy that wants to get the takedowns, he wants to get that top control, but on the feet, this guy just stands straight upwards with his hands kind of tucked by his side, and he just doesn't look that comfortable striking. He's got a very odd striking style. He's got a striking style that makes him pretty hittable, and I think against a guy who is going to be constantly moving constantly moving forward, trying to take your head off, Ali Taleb, I think, can go out there and find a lot of success on the feet, and I do think Ali Taleb is eventually going to work his way into a knockout win here. He should be able to defend the takedowns against Haz. I know we've seen him out-wrestled before, but I do think he can keep it on the feet, and I do think he can get the KO. So I'm going to pick Ali Taleb, and I'm picking Ali Taleb to win by KO. So that was all of the predictions. No, it's not for PFL MENA, because we do have the welterweight matchup between Mohammad Alaqraa taking on Omar Dafrawy. Omar Dafrawy, as I actually did say in the video that I did on PFL MENA, I believe, must have been a few months ago now, he is like the Carlos Prates from Egypt, except just a little bit less technical. Well, kind of a lot less technical, but that's how he fights. He fights with a pretty fun striking style where he does like to fight from range with his hands very low. And he does have KO power. He did knock out Joao Hussein Al-Salawi, who is a very good fighter, but just was born with no chin. Poor Hussein Al-Salawi has been KO'd so many times now, and Dafrawy did add to that. But Dafrawy, he wants this fight on the feet. He likes to fight from range. He likes to hold his hands very low. But he's going to be taking on a wrestler here in Mohammad Alaqraa. Mohammad Alaqraa here is a wrestler. He likes to close the distance, and he likes to get in top control. He doesn't have the most exciting fighting style. I wasn't all that entertained by watching his fights, I will be honest. But he is very good at what he does. And I do think in this matchup here against a striker, he should be able to get the takedowns, and he should be able to control the fight by getting the wrestling going. Most likely going to be a decision win here for Alaqraa. He doesn't necessarily have the greatest amount of finishes, but I do think that against Dafrawy, the wins, the takedowns are going to come, and that's going to lead him to a win. So I'm going to go with them to win the PFL MENA finals. And now we can move up to the finals of the PFL tournament, the main PFL tournament that we all know and love, where they are now going to be fighting for the $1 million finals. And it starts off with the heavyweight finals between Denis Goltsov versus Oleg Popov. And Oleg Popov was a pretty big time prospect when Bellator signed him, and so far it has been so good. He has had quite a few pretty impressive performances so far. Now, unfortunately, the way that I found out about Oleg Popov was when he knocked out Bigfoot Silva, and that was quite sad. But then since then, he has gone undefeated in both PFL and also Bellator as well. Defeated Steve Mowry by the punches from the crucifix position by getting on top and finishing him from there. That's a massive win to have on your record, especially in the way that he did it. And then, of course, he did go out there and beat Linton Vassell recently. And Vassell was having a couple of decent wins as well in his career just recently too, even though he is a little bit of an older fighter. Popov is a wrestler. He wants to get the takedown, and he wants to just lay on you in top control for the most part. But one thing that I have been quite impressed by him is that he is quite fast on the feet. He does have pretty decent boxing. And the funny thing about him is that at heavyweight, he does have very good movements as well. And he just fights very light on his feet. It's kind of an odd sort of style for heavyweight, because typically heavyweights are very ploddy, they're very slow. And although Popov is a pretty big boy, he does fight very light on his feet, and he does have pretty decent boxing combinations. He is going to be fighting against Denis Goltsov, who is a mountain of a man. Denis Goltsov is a guy who has been fighting for the PFL for quite a few seasons now, and I believe he has made it to the finals more than once and has come up short every time. I think he's only made the finals the one time when he did against Ferreira, to apologize there, but this is a guy that does have a lot of finishing potential. He does have a lot of wins by finish early, but a couple of them this season were just kind of sad performances to watch. You know, against Thiago Santos, Santos fought on short notice, and he just looked like a shell of himself. Sad performance for Santos. Tim Johnson, same story as well, just kind of getting up there now. Sad performance from Tim Johnson, and Denis Goltsov was able to knock him out. Goltsov, I think, in this fight is going to want to keep it on the feet. He can wrestle, but it's not something we see from him that often. He doesn't really just go out there and shoot for takedowns like Oleg Popov is going to do. And honestly, I actually think that Oleg Popov can beat Denis Goltsov here. I think that the momentum really does still ride on the Popov side. He is going to be at a bit of a significant size disadvantage, but I think he can make up for it with a bit of a speed advantage. I think that Popov is pretty fast. I think that Popov does have the ability to get the takedowns on Goltsov, And being a 5-round fight, I don't think this does go 5-round fight, go all 5 rounds. But being a 5-round fight, if anyone's going to gas out, it's going to be the guy who is the bigger fighter, I think. I think that Popov, although he does have a very energy-heavy style, I think that he can go for a little bit longer if it needs to happen like that. But I'm going to go Popov. My first underdog pick of the card. He's a very slight underdog, only like -105, -110. I mean, that's where they're lining it right now. But I like Popov here. I think that he can go out there and get it done against Denis Goltsov. And it looks like the majority of the Tapology voters have picked Popov too. I think Popov wins by KO in like round 3, just with ground and pound or something like that. Now we have Brent Primus fighting against Gadzi Rabadanov. Brent Primus, I mean, he's come into the PFL after being a Bellator champion in the past, and he's come in and found a lot more success than personally I thought that he was going to. I will be honest. He is getting up there in age now. He's nearly 40 years old, and he does have really only the grappling and the wrestling. I don't think on the feet that he does have the strongest striking. He was, of course, involved in that Usman Nurmagomedov fight where he did lose, but Usman Nurmagomedov did fail a USADA test afterwards. And now, since then, he did sign with the PFL after they acquired Bellator. And now he has found quite a bit of success in PFL, defeating strikers, though. And I think that's what's very much worth noting here is Brent Primus is a wrestler. He does have very good wins on his record with using his wrestling, obviously. But all of his wins in the PFL have been against strikers. Against Bruno Miranda, a pure Muay Thai striker. Solomon Renfro, only a striker. Literally nothing else, really. Clay Collard is a very good boxer. I know that Collard probably does have the best defensive wrestling out of everyone of the last 3 fights. But still, purely a boxer for the most part here. And I know that Primus as well does have very good pure BJJ, very good grappling. He isn't just a wrestler. This guy does have great BJJ if the fight does get down to the ground. But I think that against Gadzi Rabadanov, he's now taking on a guy that has options everywhere. Gadzi Rabadanov is going to be a bit of a size disadvantage. Primus is just a massive guy for 155, and Gadzi Rabadanov isn't really. But the thing about Gadzi Rabadanov that I have been quite impressed by is that he does win pretty tough matchups. And although this guy just does not have that much finishing ability, despite getting a big KO win recently against Michael Defort, he's beaten all kinds of different styles. Against Alvin Espinosa, Alvin Espinosa is a guy that the PFL has been trying to build up for multiple years now. And he was able to defeat him there, mixed in the wrestling with the striking. Same thing with Renfro, except it was a lot more wrestling because Renfro is a very dangerous wrestler. And then, of course, prior to that, he did defeat Pierre de Buist, who was signed over from one championship. The win over Koji Takeda, I think, is pretty important because Koji Takeda is a wrestler as well, and actually is a pretty similar stylistic matchup to what he's going to have to fight now against in Brent Primus. In this fight, though, it is actually a little bit harder to predict than I think than what the odds are making it, because Gadzi Rabadanov is a -600 favorite against Brent Primus, and I don't know if I can fully agree with those odds. Now, I am going to pick Gadzi Rabadanov to win the fight, but I'm not really that confident in it. I can't just confidently say that Gadzi Rabadanov is going to go out there and defend all of Brent Primus's takedowns, and I also can't say that Gadzi Rabadanov is going to go out there and get takedowns of Brent Primus as he wills. So it is a pretty tough one, but I do think that Gadzi is the better striker out of the two. He isn't the best striker, but he definitely is comfortable on the feet. He does throw pretty decent amount of volume, does throw a lot of kicks out there, and he does fight from range pretty well as well. But I think that this is actually kind of a situation where I don't hate the idea of picking Brent Primus as a massive underdog. Now, I'm not going to do it because I do think that Gadzi Rabadanov does win. But I think if anyone is going to maybe burn a parlay, like if you wanted to do like a 6-fighter parlay or something crazy like that, if someone's going to burn it, it really could be on this fight. I'm going to pick Gadzi, though. The reason why I am picking Gadzi is because he is a very talented wrestler in his own right. He's defeated pretty similar stylistic matchups to this one here as well. And another thing as well, although Usman was in a little bit of trouble there, Usman is a very similar stylistic fighter to what Gadzi is. Gadzi does have good kicks from range. He does also have good wrestling too. And I think that he can just be the better striker in a matchup, which, to be fair, might spend a lot of time in the ground. But I think that Gadzi over 5 rounds can do the better work and can at least win 3 rounds of those 5. So I'm going to pick Gadzi Rabadanov but I don't have the same amount of confidence as what some other people do have. Now we have Magomed Umalatov fighting against Shamil Musayev, and I have been proven so wrong about Shamil Musayev. I have actually tried to pick against Shamil Musayev this season, and obviously hasn't worked. This guy is 19-0 now, but if you do watch a lot of his prior fights to the PFL, he does have a very different striking style, or a different style in general to what he did have before then. He was in KSW, but then after one of his KSW fights, I forgot which one it was, one of these two fights, he started like a massive brawl in the cage after the fight happened. I think it was the fight against Juricic, and then I think they just kind of released him due to, honestly, sounds crazy to say, but I think they just released him due to bad behavior. But the way that this guy used to fight is he used to just be all action. He used to just have no control whatsoever. He was just coming forward. He was throwing just random strikes in combination with his chin up in the air, coming forward and just throwing down. And he was getting a lot of finishes by doing it. But I thought now that he was going to take up that step up in competition, maybe then he was going to get slowed down. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. In fact, if anything, he looked much improved. He's looked a lot more patient in the PFL, which is what I've been very impressed by so far. Like against Logan Storley and the first Murad Ramazanov fight, this guy, he just fights with a very patient style. He knows he's the better striker, but he just doesn't go out there trying to find the finish at all times like he did before signing to the PFL. And now he's a lot more composed. He uses his technique a lot better. He uses his moments of aggression a lot less often, which is a good thing for the most part. And so far, he has defeated multiple nightmare matchups for him in the PFL. Logan Storley, a nightmare matchup for him. A pure wrestler with a very big-time wrestling background is not a good matchup for Shamil Musayev, who does want to strike, although he can grapple as well. Murad Ramazanov, a former one championship fighter. I believe he might have even been a champion at one point there. He wasn't. I like to spread misinformation, I guess, but he does have good win. I mean, Sebastian Kardastam did knock out Roberto Soldic. So that's a pretty good win. And speaking of Roberto Soldic, there he is. But Murad Ramazanov was also a pretty nightmare matchup for him. A guy that wants to come forward, the guy that wants to get takedowns, and a massive guy for the division. And Musayev was able to knock him out. And then he was able to beat him in the rematch pretty soundly by decision. He fights against Magomed Umalatov, and Magomed Umalatov is a very similar stylistic fighter to what Murad Ramazanov is. But he wasn't always like that. Magomed Umalatov recently has just started to implement a lot of wrestling into his game that he didn't typically implement so much before. If you do watch his older fights for the PFL, because he has been signed to the promotion for a pretty long time now, he was just a striker. He genuinely was a striker. He used to just like to be on the feet, and he looked like he had a pretty good technical striking. And then when he fought against Nayib Lopez, just kind of out of nowhere, he started to implement a lot of offensive wrestling. And against Nayib Lopez, he did manage to out-wrestle him there. A lot of the time, he had to pull out of fights due to injuries, but now we're finally going to see him in the finals. And in multiple fights so far, he has been able to showcase his wrestling pretty well. He was able to out-wrestle Andrei Koreshkov, who was just a very dynamic striker that come over from Bellator himself. Against Brennan Ward, he just took him down, choked him out. Pretty easy work for him. Brennan Ward, once again, a fighter that come over from Bellator. And the same thing with Naaman Gracie, was able to beat Naaman Gracie by decision. I did think he was going to knock out Naaman there, but Naaman is a pretty tricky fighter kind of for anyone. But I do think that in this matchup, it is a similar stylistic matchup to what we have seen Musayev win before. And I do think that we're going to see Shamil Musayev go out there and win the $1 million. This guy is the real deal. I will say, I wasn't sold on him originally. I really wasn't. But now, the more that I see from Shamil Musayev, the more that I realize fighters can improve. They can. And Shamil Musayev has greatly improved. This guy has really kind of even changed his entire fighting style. He doesn't fight the same way he did 2 years ago at all. And I think that's for the best. I think against Magomed Umalatov, although Umalatov is a pretty good striker himself, he has been wrestling a lot recently. And honestly, I think he's actually looked a little bit worse for it. And I think that Shamil Musayev can defend the takedowns if he needs to, can reverse the takedowns if he needs to. And I think that someone's getting knocked out here, and I think it is going to be Umalatov. Now, I think that there is a real chance, obviously, for Umalatov to win. He's 17-0 against good competition in his own right. Fought for the PFL since 2021, and he's still undefeated. But I do think that Shamil Musayev goes out there, and I think that Shamil Musayev is going to get the knockout over Magomed Umalatov in this fight here. And I think he's going to get it done probably in the first 3 rounds. I know I just talked about how Shamil has now started fighting a lot more patiently. I think in a 5-round fight, this guy probably doesn't want to go 5 rounds. I think he's just going to try and get the finish pretty early on. Shamil Musayev is minus 200. You might be able to get a pretty good price later on in the week on Umalatov if you do like him as the underdog. And an underdog that some people are going to be looking at this weekend is Dovletchan Yagshimuradov, as he does fight Impa Kasanganay here, who is the defending champion at 205 pounds for the 2023 championship, now trying to win it again in 2024. Impa Kasanganay, as you guys may or may not know, actually did at one point fight in the UFC at 170 pounds. And he actually didn't have necessarily too bad of a career. He was released, in my opinion, a little bit too early. But in hindsight, for Impa himself, it has actually worked out very, very well, as he did win the $1 million last year and is now finding success in 205 pounds, and even gave Johnny Eblen a pretty good fight at 185 pounds. So yes, he fought at 170, he fought Jared Gooden at 185, and then he fought at 205 pounds in the PFL's Dana White's Contender Series, I guess you could call it, the Challenger Series, and then won it all last year. So far, it's looked pretty good as well. He's 3-0 in the season, and he's taken on good competition. He beat Josh Silveira, who he defeated to win the entire championship in 2023, and he also defeated a couple of guys that just have pretty tough styles in different ways. Jacob Nedo is a guy that is a pressure forward striker that does have some massive power for the weight class, and Alex Polizzi is a wrestler that will just shoot for takedowns over and over and over and over again, and he was able to knock out Alex Polizzi in the first round, and he finished Jacob Nedo with a doctor stoppage in between the rounds 2 and 3. Before that, of course, he did defeat not really the highest level of competition, I will admit, in the 2023 playoffs, but he did go all the way into the World Championship, where he defeated a pretty tough Silveira by mixing up the striking with the wrestling. Dovletchan Yagshimuradov is now going to be probably his toughest test, I would say, aside from Josh Silveira in that finals beforehand, because Dovletchan can do it all. Dovletchan is a 205er, even though he is 5'11" himself. He is going to be a pretty big boy in there compared to Impa Kasanganay. He is, for the most part, a guy that does want to come forward and box, but he does shoot for takedowns pretty regularly as well. So kind of think of him as a boxer-wrestler sort of fighter. He does like to move forward all the time, and when he does move forward, he is throwing punches. He likes to close the distance, and he does like to box, but he doesn't really have the best technique, I don't think. But it doesn't really matter too much, because he does have a lot of power behind those shots. He doesn't mind clinching up against the cage. He doesn't mind putting his opponents there. And I think maybe using that strength advantage against Impa Kasanganay is probably something that he will look to try and do. He did upset Rob Wilkinson, who is a former champion himself, and he was able to beat Rob Wilkinson in a very impressive decision win, where he just kind of beat him up, to be honest. And Rob Wilkinson never really figured out Dovletchan Yagshimuradov, so maybe if Dovletchan can make Impa Kasanganay kind of confused in there like he was able to with Rob, maybe we can see Dovletchan pulling off a slight upset here. I do think Impa is going to win, though. I think that he is at a size disadvantage, and I am seeing people say that this is going to be like one of the toughest tests for Impa, because it is now going to be against a legitimate 205-pound fighter. In the past, he has been fighting admittedly smaller guys at light heavyweight, but I think against Dovletchan Yagshimuradov, Dovletchan is a kind of guy that I think that Impa can find success against on the feet and also on the ground. I think he's a lot more technical on the feet, but I think on the feet he's probably going to avoid Dovletchan for the first round. I think he's actually going to try and get those takedowns himself. And we've seen Impa look good against other good wrestlers. I mean, Martin Hamlet, I know that Martin Hamlet isn't really like the best fighter overall, but he's still a guy with a great Greco-Roman background. He was able to knock him out. Impa has also been able to find some very good wrestling exchanges against Johnny Eblen, who we know is also a very good wrestler at 185 pounds. So I think that Impa can go out there against Dovletchan Yagshimuradov and just kind of use the more speed that I think he's going to have and the better technique that he's going to have to survive the first 2 rounds, because Dovletchan's going to be dangerous, and then start to take over towards the end. We've seen Mbakasanganai already go 5 rounds. We've seen him go 3 rounds recently as well. And I think that that is going to be a pretty good advantage for him, especially since I don't really think that he cuts weight to make 205 pounds. And if he does, it's probably a very small amount. I'm going with Impa here, a very slight favourite at -130, -140. Dofletsan, as I did say, is a pretty popular underdog. He's only +110. But I'm going to go with Impa. I think he wins a 5-round decision, and I think he wins a 5-round decision, mostly based off the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th round. Now we move up to Dakota Dachiva taking on Taila Santos. And I don't think it would be too far-fetched to say that Dakota Dachiva is probably the PFL's biggest star. And she is the real deal. She is actually a fighter that, personally, I have been doubting. I was one of those doubters. I have picked her to win every single fight along the way. But I have also been saying that I felt that she was being a little bit protected. She did get her first fight against Lisa Malden, which is a very good matchup for her. Malden was fighting for the first time in a while, was a little bit older. And then Chelsea Hackett, a striker from Australia, who once again was not very active. She was on the Contender Series years ago, and then took some time away. But then she did finally go up there against a very tough Jenna Bishop. And Jenna Bishop is a girl who has incredible grappling and a massive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. And if anyone was really going to give her big problems aside someone like Taila Santos or Liz Carmouche, it probably was going to be Jenna Bishop. And we saw Dakota Dachiva knock her down multiple times and eventually get that KO there. Jenna Bishop didn't have no success, though, I will say. She did have quite a few takedown attempts on Dachiva, but yeah, just no match for her on the feet. And honestly, at the end of the round, it looked like Jenna Bishop was getting gassed out before she got finished, sorry. But yeah, Dachiva is the real deal. She has a big-time kickboxing background. You see it in her fights. She's massive for the weight class at 5'8". She's quite tall, but she's also got quite a bit. Doesn't really have that much size to her, but she is a big fighter at 125 pounds. She uses her range very well. She just throws a lot of straight shots with her hands, a lot of kicks as well to the body, to the legs, and just sets up everything very, very well. And so far, against nearly all of her opponents, her takedown defense has looked quite good. One thing that I think that she is going to have an advantage over here against Taila Santos is actually a speed advantage. Now, Taila Santos used to be a fighter which I think a lot of people considered to be a pretty quick fighter at 125 pounds. But I think that she started to slow down quite a bit. And there's a lot of things that have gone on with Taila Santos that have kind of led to her being released from the UFC as a ranked fighter and now fighting for the PFL. Now, she fought Shevchenko. And then I believe in between the Shevchenko and Blanchfield camp, she had like a falling out with her gym. And now she just trains in her garage with her husband or something like that. So that was kind of odd. And then I think that there was some like visa issues or something along those lines, which led to her getting released from the UFC. But there was a reason towards it anyway, which did make some sense at the time. But yeah, Taila Santos in the PFL has looked good. Got a quick submission over the former Bellator fighter Joao. Beat Jenna Bishop, who I was just talking about before, by a split decision. And then beat the former Bellator champion, who was on a massive run at the time, Liz Carmouche, because Liz Carmouche was on a huge win streak and actually was able to win the title at 125 pounds at Bellator, and then also had a win streak going in PFL herself. Taila Santos, though, we all know what Taila Santos is going to probably want to do in this matchup, and that is grappling. Now, Taila Santos isn't really a grappler. That's the thing about her, is she is probably primarily a striker with very good grappling in the back pocket, but I think in this fight she's going to probably just have to become a grappler, trying to get the takedowns against Dakota Dachiva, which could come. That's the thing about Dakota. We haven't really seen her fight this level of competition so far, and that is what I've been saying the whole time, is we haven't seen Dakota fight this level of competition so far, but honestly, from what I've seen so far, I don't know if it matters, man. I think that Dakota Dachiva is the real deal. She's getting knockouts that we don't really see that much. She's fighting with a lot of speed that we don't really see that much. She's crazy athletic, crazy quick. Taila Santos, she's having some good performances here and there, but I think that honestly against an opponent like Dachiva, this is a bad matchup for her. And yeah, I just kind of hope that Dachiva's takedown defense is as good as I think it is, because if it's not that good, Taila Santos could get the submission and she could pull off the crazy upset here. Because Dachiva's so wide, she's minus 315, minus 320-ish, I would say, at the moment. And Taila Santos is a pretty big underdog, which is a pretty kind of crazy price to think about, because I don't think it would be that far-fetched to even not compare this matchup to the Shevchenko matchup, because Valentina Shevchenko, we all know Shevchenko for being a really good striker, but I would say that Shevchenko's grappling is better than Dachiva's. So there's kind of a lot to kind of look into here. But I think that Dachiva's going to get it done. I think she can beat Taila Santos. And honestly, she's just looked so good so far. It's hard not to pick Dakota Dachiva to win by knockout and win that $1 million, which it honestly feels like she's just destined to do at this point. Now we have in the main event and also the final of the featherweights, Brendan Loughnane now fights against Timur Khizriev. And this is an interesting one, because I think that you can make a very serious argument for Brendan Loughnane to win this. The problem that I have is I just still do see Brendan Loughnane have weird performances. I don't really know how else to describe it. I am going to go pretty far back now in his career to 2022, where he just fought and didn't look amazing. It's kind of like an odd season because he actually won the championships this year, but a lot of people think that he lost to Ryoji Kudo, and then he got a decision win. He couldn't finish Ego Huskic, who fought him on very short notice, and that was a massive step down in competition for him. But then he beat some very good guys. He beat Chris Wade, who at the time was in a pretty good shape at that point, and then Bubba Jenkins, who is a very massive wrestler for 145 pounds. But then he goes out there after winning the championship in 2022, fights Marlon Moraes, who at this point was on his legendary losing streak, and looked pretty bad against Moraes. I mean, he looked terrible in the first round, and then he got the leg kick finish in the second, and then he lost to Jesus Pinedo, took all that time off after getting knocked out, and come back and has looked good again. You know, against Kai Kamaka III, his most recent fight, nearly knocked out Kai Kamaka III in the first round, and then Kamaka kind of launched a bit of a comeback in the second and the third round. But I do think that Brendan Loughnane did win 2 out of 3 rounds there in that fight. And he defeated the wrestler Dustin Gonzalez. That's the thing about Brendan. This guy has bad performances every now and then, but most of the time, he has a very good performance. And the thing as well that I think a lot of people could draw to try and pick him is the fact that Brendan Loughnane has actually beaten a lot of very similar stylistic fighters to what Timur Khizriev is going to try and bring to the table. Justin Gonzalez is a wrestler. Is he the best wrestler? Not really, but a similar stylistic matchup. I even think that Bubba Jenkins is a pretty similar stylistic matchup to what Timur Khizriev is going to bring to the table. And then, of course, Mavlid Kabuliev is somebody that does exist. I do think that, though, from what I've seen, I like Timur in the matchup, and the reason why I do like Timur in the matchup is that because in his most recent fight against Gabriel Braga, against Gabriel Braga, he showed that he's not lost on the feet. In fact, he won that fight. That was a striking fight. All 3 rounds really took place on the feet, and Timur never really shot takedowns that much, which is a little bit concerning going into a matchup against Loughnane. But that tells me that Timur's confidence in his boxing. And I like that a lot, actually, in this fight. I like the fact that Timur isn't going to feel lost on the feet. I like the fact that Timur isn't going to feel uncomfortable on the feet. And Braga and Loughnane aren't really too similar, but they do both have a somewhat similar striking style, but Braga's just a lot less low volume. In fact, Braga's a very low volume striker. But in that fight, Timur won by being more busy. He did win the fight. 2 of the judges gave it 30-27 to Khizriev, and 1 of them had it 29-28 for Braga. I scored it. I did watch the fight before recording this video, and I did score 2 rounds to Khizriev. I think you've got to give Braga the 3rd round, but it is what it is. And another thing as well is Khizriev did start to slow down in that 3rd round. And that is a bit of a concern, isn't it? This is 5 rounds. Loughnane has been to the 4th round. I believe he actually has been 5 rounds before as well. And if Khizriev is going to slow down, that's not going to bode too well for him. But the thing as well about Khizriev is this guy does have very good wrestling in the back pocket. This guy got signed to Bellator. He came into Bellator, and he won his fights by decision by just dominating in top control. He beat the veteran with 55 pro fights, Daniel Weichel, by decision, by dominating in top control. And he did the same thing to all of his opponents. You know, he beat Brett Johns, you know, the former bantamweight from the UFC, by doing that. Enrique Barzola a pretty tough guy at 135, and he was able to do that. Justin Gonzalez, as I just mentioned from Brendan Loughnan's win, also a wrestler, and Khizriev was able to out-wrestle the wrestler. Khizriev's not really the most dangerous guy, but I do like the fact that on the feet he's not going to feel lost. I think he's going to be outclassed, though. I think Loughnane is the faster striker and just has so many more weapons than him. Khizriev does throw kicks, but he's not really that good at throwing kicks. Loughnane has knees. He's got kicks. He's got the leg kicks, the body kicks, the knees in the clinch. Like, he nearly knocked out Kai Kamaka with a third width. And I think that overall Loughnane just has so many more tools on the feet than Khizriev, but it comes down to the wrestling. And I think that Khizriev on the feet cannot be too far behind, and then he can just get takedowns towards the end of the rounds. You know, with 3 minutes to go, he can get a takedown, or even at the start of the round, he might be able to get a takedown just because his wrestling is that good. So I am going to go with Khizriev here. I do think that minus 310 is a very wide. This is actually a low confidence pick because, as I said, Loughnane does have bad performances. He does look bad in some fights, but he looks fantastic in others. But I think that Khizriev can go out there and defeat Loughnane by 5-round decision. I do worry about the cardio. That is definitely something to talk about here, as he did slow down towards the end against Braga. But I think he can get the takedowns and not be too far behind on the feet. There's a 16 fight card. I think I just broke down 15 of those fights. It's probably a long video. Hopefully you guys didn't mind it too much. Let me know what you think in the comments. And I'll see you guys in the next one.